G'day you melted butterfiends and welcome back to Condensed Popcorn. In this video I'll be recapping the 1998 British-American crime comedy film written and directed by Guy Ritchie called Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, the acting debut of the saviour to bald men all around the world, Jason Statham. Warning, there will be spoilers ahead. In the film's first shot, we are introduced to Bacon, who is selling stolen goods on the street. He has the gift of the gab and gets people to buy his stock without hesitation. His partner in crime, Ed, posing as a potential buyer, suddenly shouts, "Bacon, causes!" warning him the police are coming, so they both leg it. While on the run, the narrator tells us that Ed's real talent lies in cards and gambling with cards. Ed enters the store and approaches two guys, Tom, who has been currently haggled by Nick for a stolen stereo. Tom seems to lose patience with Nick and his bargaining and tells him it's the sale of the fucking century. In fact, I think I'll keep it. Nick caves into fear of loss and reluctantly buys at the agreed price. He then proceeds to pull out a big fat pile of money from his pocket and counts out 200 from it, barely making a dent. They make fun of Nick for being tighter than a duck's butt. The narrator then formally introduces Tom as the entrepreneur of the bunch. Tom, Ed and Bacon then enter a chef's kitchen. The chef is the fourth crew member and goes by the name Soap. He was dubbed this because of his persistence in keeping his hands clean of any unlawful behaviour. He's proud of his job and he's proud it's legal. Soap pulls out a stack of cash, 25 grand he's saved. The rest of the crew chip in the same amount for a total of 100k. Ed leaves the kitchen, announcing it's time to contact Harry. Harry, aka the businessman, is in charge of deciding who and who cannot participate in underground poker games. Harry asks Ed if he has the 100 grand over the phone, informing him, if yes, they're in, and then bluntly hangs up. Harry asks his right-hand man Barry, "What's Eddie like?" "Eddie's a thief," he says. Barry is Harry's number one guy, nicknamed Barry the Baptist. He's in charge of ensuring that the administrative side of the business runs harmoniously, which generally means making sure everyone pays their debts to Harry, usually by force. He warns Harry that Ed is brilliant with cards, suggesting they'll have to watch out for him. The boys are all at Ed's apartment. Ed is counting the money, making sure they have the full 100 grand. Bacon says to Tom that he all the time hears his neighbours through the walls and mentions that they rip off drug dealers. Cut to a new location where we meet the Stoners, who run a weed growing business. The ringleaders are Winston and Willie. When another housemate is let in the front door, Winston asks Charles, what have they got the cage for if they don't keep it locked? Charles mumbles an excuse saying, it's just Willie and he lives here. Winston rolls his eyes, pointing out to Charles that he opened the door before he even knew it was Willie. Winston gets angry and insists just keep the cage closed. Willie, who just entered, is accompanied by a girl called Gloria, who is clearly baked out of her mind. Introducing Big Chris, the hired muscle for Harry. Alongside him is Little Chris, his son and protege, who tags along for the business errands. Barry confirms to Harry that it appears Ed has gathered the full 100 grand and mentioned that Ed's dad owns a pub outright, insinuating that Harry will be able to take the bar off their hands with no dramas in case anything goes wrong. Harry changes the topic, reminding Barry to get these heritage muskets he has his eyes on ASAP before they'll be auctioned off. Barry reassures he has it sorted. Now Barry gives the job of stealing the muskets to Gary and Dean, who I'll be calling Dumb and Dumber, because it becomes quickly apparent that they are not the sharpest tools in the shed. Ed arrives holding the bag with all his crew's money on the night of the big poker game. It's actually Ed's first time meeting Harry. He greets the other players and the dealer. He's familiar with them from his card playing days. Meanwhile, as the rest of the boys are not allowed to enter the event, they wait at a nearby pub called Samoan Joe's. Dumb and Dumber arrive outside the house where the muskets are. They break in, but they don't appear to have any real strategy. Gary ties the owners up and demands to know where they keep the money. Dean approaches him holding the muskets and insists he's wasting his breath, saying that these people are poor. Then, out of nowhere, an old-timer comes out and tries to shoot them, but just misses the shot. As the poker game proceeds, Harry cheats by having Barry monitor the game through a hidden camera. He raises the wager to 250 grand, which Ed doesn't have, so he can't continue. Harry offers to loan the additional money to him. Ed accepts the loan, but then loses the hand. Harry demands the money to be paid back within a week. Ed leaves the premises and vomits at the idea of how much shit he's gotten himself into. When he arrives at the pub, he breaks the bad news to the guys. Amongst the discussion, they say that Harry will start chopping fingers if they can't pay back in time. Back at the Stoners' house, the intercom starts buzzing. Winston reminds Willie to use the cage, and Willie ignores him and just opens the door, telling Winston to chill because it's only Plank coming in. Plank's there to buy some weed. Whilst this is happening, we can see that Gloria has truly become one with the couch. We next see Plank relaying info about the stoners to a bloke called Dog. He's the leader of the dealer jacking gang living next door to Ed. He tells him that he's been buying weed off them for years and that they are an easy target to rob. He mentions how their security gate is never locked. While they have this conversation, we get a shot revealing the lads have overheard the whole plan. Big Chris and Little Chris attend a meeting with Harry, who informs them about our boys who owe £500,000. The boys gather and Ed explains his new plan to get the money for Harry, suggesting they wait till the neighbours rob the stoners, then they rob them. Ed asks Tom to talk to Nick the Bubble about shifting the weed for cash once they steal it. Tom meets Nick and Nick confirms he knows Rory Breaker, who will be keen to buy high quality weed from them. Nick just needs a sample. Tom then asks him if he can get him a couple guns. Barry meets with Dumb and Dumber to collect the guns. When he asks where the two old looking muskets are, they tell him, they sold them, thinking those guns were old looking and not worth much. Barry then threatens them to unsell them and quickly bring them back to him. Turns out Nick is the one who bought the muskets, which he then sells to Tom. Tom makes a couple of jokes about the gun's appearance, saying they lack criminal credibility. Big Chris pays a visit to Ed's dad, played by Sting for some reason, informing him Harry likes his bar and wants to buy it off him, which Sting doesn't like. Big Chris then tells him about Ed's $500,000 debt, which must be paid back to Harry within 3 days. Meanwhile, Bacon, whilst eavesdropping, learns that the neighbours will return to the apartment after the robbery to unload everything. The neighbours have now arrived at the Stoners' house to perform the heist. Plank buzzes the intercom and asks for Willie. Charlie tells him Willie isn't home, which is a lie as we see Willie and Winston are in the middle of counting their money. Plank insists on letting him in, saying he's after a considerable amount this time. Winston is against letting Planks in, although Willie convinces him. When Planks enter, he realizes for the first time ever, the gate is locked. Planks, thinking on his feet, grabs Charles and threatens him at gunpoint to open the gate, which causes Charles to faint. The rest of the crew hear Planks' screams and decide to intervene. When they appear at the entrance, Planks struggles to grab the keys off an unconscious Charles. Upset the gate is still closed, they start yelling at each other. Winston and the other stoners now realise they're getting done over. They shoot at the neighbours with just a little air gun through a small hatch. It doesn't seem to do much, besides annoy them. The thugs then blow Charles's toes off, demanding to open the gate, saying they'll blow Charles's whole leg off otherwise. Winston tells Willie that he's going down, and tells him to figure out a plan while he confronts the thieves. After finally getting through the gate, the thugs grab Winston and demand to know where they hide the money. Winston says it's up the back, which is where Willie is hiding. Willie waits, holding a machete, which unfortunately doesn't work out as he hoped. And he quickly learns why you should never bring a knife to a gunfight. R.I.P. Willie. The thugs find the weed and the cash at the back of the property. While packing everything into the van, one of them encounters a traffic warden who is in the middle of writing them a parking ticket. They knock him out and put him in the back of the van alongside the rest of the loot. One of the thugs approaches Willie, wanting to double check that he is dead for sure. Then, out of nowhere, Gloria wakes up. It turns out she was there the whole time in pure couch potato form. She grabs the machine gun and starts shooting. Unfortunately, she only manages to land the first few bullets and fails to transfer the spray to Dog and Planks. Once she's out of bullets, no longer a threat, they simply knock her out. GG, BL. Meanwhile, the boys break into the neighbour's apartment to set their trap. When the neighbours return, the boys jump out from their hiding spots and get straight to business. Without any hiccups, they quickly relieve the neighbours of their loot. They drive up to where their car is parked so they can reload it. It is here where they realise they have some unexpected luggage. The parking officer. They later return to put everything into their apartment for safekeeping. Tom asks Nick to sell the stolen weed as soon as possible. Nick goes straight to Rory Breaker. He wants to get a second opinion of the quality of the weed. Nick then leaves, saying he'll get back to him. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Breaker finds out that his weed supplier has been robbed. Turns out, the stoners are working for him. So the boys are now trying to sell the stolen weed back to its original owner. The lads decide it's time to celebrate, thinking that their troubled days are now behind them. Mr. Breaker demands to see Nick to find out which idiots are trying to sell him the weed. The neighbours are trying to wrap their heads around who robbed them desperately, and none of them can figure out who possibly did it. Dog gets extremely angry and starts beating his lackeys. Amongst the chaos, Plank's head smashes through the wall, where he sees a whole bunch of recording equipment. Dumb and Dumber, who are now trying to get their muskets back, call Nick, saying they have to return them. Nick informs them that he can't return them because the guns have already been sold to someone, and most likely he'll never see those people again. After a bit of back and forth, Nick gets annoyed and just hangs up on him. They relay the bad news to Barry, who tells him that he does not give a shit and that they need to get those guns back. Barry then has the phone taken off him by Harry, who makes it crystal clear that it's in their best interest. Reinvigorated, they call Nick again to find out who he sold them to. Mr. Bracker and his henchmen head to Ed's apartment, strapped head to toe. And at that exact moment, the boys are also on their way to Ed's house. When Mr. Bracker arrives, Plank is inside, visibly confused, not knowing what's going on, starts shooting. This causes an old-fashioned shootout. Hearing the guns from the next room, Dog sneaks out with the muskets and the money bags. He then encounters Big Chris, who has also been sent to Ed's by Harry to pass a message about their remaining time to pay up. Big Chris confiscates all the loot and gives a little headbutt as a tip. This is all witnessed by Dumb and Dumber, who are waiting outside so they can get the muskets back. Ed's apartment is demolished. Winston luckily manages to survive. He drives off with as much of the weed as he can hold and nearly crashes into the boys who have just arrived. When they enter, they realise during their absence that shit has truly hit the fan. Dead bodies are all over the joint, and worst of all, the money and all the gear has been pinched. Big Chris brings all the goods to Harry, including the guns, informing him that the boys had them. He says, "I know you like this sort of thing, and I wondered if you want them." Harry is impressed. Outside of Harry's place, Dumb and Dumber see Big Chris leaving the building. They are trying to develop a plan to get the guns back for Barry. They enter the building, clueless to the connection between Barry and Harry. Ed calls Harry, but before he can share the bad news, Harry interjects that he got the money and he does not care how Ed and the boys managed to get it. Although he is concerned about how the hell the guns ended up in their hands. He tells Ed he wants to see him in his office pronto just to clear things up. After the phone call, Dean appears in Harry's doorway holding a gun. Harry is in the process of cleaning the musket, so he automatically starts shooting. Gary, hearing the shots, decides to burst in, guns blazing. Suddenly, he gets chopped by an axe from behind. He then does a 180 no-scope, which is when he realises the person that threw the axe was Barry. Which you can say all round this has been a great team building exercise. When Big Chris returns to his car, Dog is sitting in the back with a knife to his son's neck. Dog wants his money back. Big Chris says the money's inside the office. Then, he starts driving towards the front of Harry's building. Ed and Tom have now arrived at Harry's. They realise everyone is dead when they enter his office, including Harry himself. Ed decides to grab the money bags and then him and Tom decide to get the heck out. Tom tells Ed he'll catch up. Ed enters the car, the rest of the boys wait for him. They ask, "What's going on?" And Ed says, "I don't know. What I do know is there's no more Harry. And if there's no more Harry, there's no more debt." At that point, Big Chris smashes his car into the back of them. He gets out of the car and then starts slamming the car door onto Dog's head like a madman. He then approaches the boys' car. When he opens the door, he sees that the guys have the money. He grabs the bags and heads back to Harry's office. When entering the room, Big Chris encounters Tom, who's holding the muskets. They decide not to engage each other. Big Chris leaves with the bag full of money, Tom with the guns. No one gets hurt. The police arrive and arrest everyone. When Ed gets out of the police station, he has a conversation with his dad. Sting wants to know if the boys are in the clear. Ed says that it appears so since everyone else is dead. We next see the boys who have met at JD's pub. Tom explains to them what happened at the police station. The traffic warden, being a witness, identifies the neighbours from the dead bodies, so the lads are no longer suspects. Now the only thing connecting them with the case are the muskets. So they designate Tom to get rid of them as soon as possible. Tom leaves and heads towards a bridge to throw the guns in the river. This is when Big Chris enters the pub and throws a bag on the table in front of the boys, letting them know that he underestimated them. He says, "You're welcome," and then he threatens them not to look for him before leaving. It appears the bag is empty except for a magazine about guns. They think it's nothing until they see a page with the muskets displayed, stating that they are worth between $250,000 and £300,000 each. The boys desperately scramble to try and call Tom. In the final scene, we see Tom and his attempts to throw the guns off the bridge, all the while his phone is ringing. Whether he answers the phone in time is left open for our imagination. And that's the end of the film. Now go buy the DVD, you tight asses.